Interestingly, when Uzbekistan had that relative freedom time, just the 3-4 years, the international community, the embassies here, the international organizations, including this embassy, including the United Nations, were more open, more critical of the status quo in Tashkent. And it's now quite silent. I mean, diplomats seem to be quite comfortable with the way the Uzbek government is now, with the leadership, and it's usually whenever we read their statements, whenever they talk at various public events, it's very supportive of everything that's been going on. We know that every partner of Uzbekistan has its own recommendations, has its own wish list, but in general, you've been very complimentary of everything that's happening in Uzbekistan. Is that intentional? Like, how does that come around? Because you seem very comfortable, for example, with the way the presidential administration functions. You have a good relationship with Saida Mirziyoyeva, we believe, and you're fine. You seem to be fine with wherever Uzbekistan is heading next.
I think the administration here deserves a lot of credit for the things that they have done, for the vision that they have articulated, for some of the reforms that have been implemented. But I've been very candid also about where I think things have come up short. And every year, as you know, we produce a very public human rights report in addition to our report on religious freedom, which articulates where we think there are shortcomings. I think it's important, though, that we recognize overall progress and not focus too much on kind of individual areas where there could be improvement, because quite frankly we see this government as a partner that we can work with, and as long as that partnership is productive and we're seeing progress not only in deepening the relationship in areas of mutual interest, but seeing them make progress on their own economic and democratic reforms, and you'll probably continue to hear me say positive things about them.
How comfortable are you with the political nature? You have president's daughter is now president's closest advisor. What does it say about the political development in this country?
I don't presume to judge or cast judgment on the president here in terms of like who he chooses as his advisors. That is up to him.
And with the history of presidential daughters here in this country, in the neighboring Kazakhstan, in the region itself, the experience, because people always judge the situation based on those histories, right?
I think people should be judged on the basis of themselves, not on the basis of somebody else. So, I don't pay much attention to those comparisons.
And you see Saida Mirziyoyeva and others around her as full-fledged officials?
I have dealt with Ms. Mirziyoyeva as an advisor to the president. I think she's been a very productive and capable interlocutor on the issues that we've discussed. But I'm not pretending that she's fulfilling a role that she's not. I think there's been a lot of commentary about like what her role is she being groomed to be a successor to the president?
Right.
Far be it from me to judge that. I don't know what the president's intentions are. Obviously, I think that anybody who succeeds the president needs to be somebody who's elected, and needs to be somebody who's campaigned, and needs to be somebody who is judged in the eyes of the people of Uzbekistan as somebody who has the requisite experience and expertise. I don't presume right now to be able to predict who that might be.
Some of your colleagues who also had conversations with her told me in Washington that they see her as a change maker. So she and others around her claim to be the reformers of Uzbekistan. They are leading the reform process, and they want the reform program, the reform agenda to succeed. How do you see her and the team around President Mirziyoyev now?
I think we're focusing too much on one individual. I've seen, for example, in the 2 years I've been here, there have been, as you know, some shake-ups in the government, new ministers. I've seen a number of younger, Western-educated ministers appointed, who I think have been also really strong advocates for the president's reform agenda. I've also met with a number of ministers who are, I think, kind of appointed because of their technocratic expertise in certain ministries, and I found them also to be, very, very capable interlocutors and, and advocates for the president's agenda as well. So I just worry that we tend to focus on, individuals and their relatives, and I think it's probably a mistaken focus.
You know why we tend to focus on that? Because other ministers that you are mentioning were more visible for a while. They're not anymore. So who you see now is President Mirziyoyev and Saida Mirziyoyeva. So there is this natural attention on them, For example, Saida Mirziyoyeva also got recently appointed as someone who's responsible for Pakistan. They're begging for focus. What is new about Uzbekistan? We see that this is something that people actively discuss around the country. They may be whispering, they may not be necessarily, debating on air, but they are paying attention to these things.
Well, I would hope that journalists like yourself, and maybe the ones that you trained, in the solutions-based journalism, will resist the kind of, the temptation to just go for the easy stories.
Sure.
It'd be a lot more interesting, I think, and a lot more informative for the Uzbek public if they did focus on some of these other key individuals, I think, who are helping kind of, frankly, transform Uzbekistan and build the Uzbekistan of the future.
This is a very young country, as you know, and you, on a day-to-day basis, I'm sure you meet a lot of Uzbeks. What is new about them? How do you see the Uzbek society changing in your eyes?
Yeah, I think for me it seems like a society that is very much has its eyes open to the rest of the world. And we're seeing, I think, young people for whom it's not difficult at all to imagine, getting, for example, an education abroad or getting, working abroad. And I think that's exciting because I think Uzbekistan, an Uzbekistan that's open to the rest of the world is likely to be one that's going to be able to develop more quickly, to be able to integrate, to be able to diversify its relationships, and ultimately emerge as, I think, a strong and independent partner.
You have worked with Uzbekistan for a while now, for decades. I mean, you started your career here, or you were a young diplomat here when Uzbekistan became independent, and from Washington you also oversaw policy towards Uzbekistan and towards Central Asia. And again, for the longest time, Uzbekistan was a country where we just heard from the government. So we judged everything based on what the government was saying. It was hard to engage the people of Uzbekistan. Now we have more ways to engage, and including the international community, including America. You are in conversation with the Uzbek people, right? We can say that. You're talking with them on a day-to-day basis. So what you hear from the government and what you hear from the people, how connected are those things? How consistent are they with each other?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that question. I think the president himself is concerned about hearing from the people, and that's why he's talked about the important role that media has. He's even talked about the important role that bloggers have. And from everything I've seen, the president, either he's reading social media himself or somebody is passing him.
He's definitely following.
Right. And so he knows that, I think, to be an effective leader of this country, you have to have your finger on the pulse of, the way people feel. I think it's difficult still in Uzbekistan, as much as we've seen things improved. The media environment needs to be, strengthened even further. And people need to, feel comfortable, expressing themselves and seeking out opinions. And I think as we see that develop and improve, we'll see that gap potentially between, the government's voices and the people's voices start to narrow.
And to what extent you take that into account as you analyze your policy here, your own achievements here, and provide, reports to Washington? Like, how is that going to shape U.S. policy towards the region, towards Uzbekistan?
I mean, we are trying to build a relationship that will transcend administrations, whether that's a change in the U.S. administration or a change in the administration here in Uzbekistan. So fundamentally, that is a relationship between our countries, between our peoples. So I'd say, I don't know if we get the balance perfectly right, but, we want to work with the government, because we see the government trying to do things on the, to the benefit of the Uzbek people here. At the same time, we, do want to have a direct conversation with the Uzbek people and to work with them as well.
The word nepotism is quite often raised still in the Uzbek social media, if not in the day-to-day media, even though there are more conversations about the conflicts of interest now in this country. And we did discuss this summer in our trainings about where things stand in terms of like anti-corruption efforts, in the country. So there is some progress there that we observe. And yet, there are concerns that the levels of nepotism in the system is going to affect the economic development of this country, the social development of this country, and in general, the discussions of everything. Do you observe that process as well?
I think that's a problem we face everywhere. It continues to be a problem in the United States and is obviously still a major problem here as well. And corruption is an insidious tax on everybody in the country. And so a number of our programs are intended to strengthen the rule of law here, to work with the anti-corruption agency, to help develop laws on conflict of interest, on financial disclosures of government officials, something that we, including myself, have to do in the United States. These are kind of, I think, best practices from around the world that are that help to frankly try to minimize and reduce corruption. It's never going to completely disappear. But what you want to do is minimize the impact, the negative impact that it can have on a society, on the good functioning of government, on undermining public trust in government. Because people aren't going to trust the government. They're not going to feel comfortable paying taxes to a government if they think that those taxes are going to be misused.
Are you discussing these at the highest levels? Can you talk about this freely, for example, in your meetings with Saeed Mirziyoyev and others?
Absolutely. No, we've talked about these and other issues.
And they agree with you, or?
They have echoed the president's desire to tackle corruption and have talked about the need to move various steps forward and implement certain laws. I can't remember like how much in detail we got into in those discussions, but nothing I've heard from the senior officials I've engaged here leads me to believe that that they're not supportive of the president's agenda. Now that doesn't mean it's going to be easy. I think tackling corruption is one of the most difficult things you can do. There are a lot of vested interests, and status quo interests that are going to oppose a lot of the reforms, a lot of the laws that are necessary. So we'll continue to try to work on it.
Yeah, this is why it took so long to actually even get to this point, right? To adopt finally something on conflicts of interest. We believe that you have very candid conversations with the Uzbek government, and one thing that they're still sensitive is the foreign influence. And we've seen what's happening in the neighboring countries, foreign influence, restricting laws and decrees. In Uzbekistan, we don't have that yet. Even though we know that the leadership is still sensitive about who is doing what and who's working, like especially the sources of funding, the intentions of various countries or the governments in Uzbekistan. We know that they're very sensitive about Russian role. They are sensitive also about the Western countries. America's influence, for example. We know that many people who go abroad for trainings or for exchange programs come back and they get interrogated, they get pressured by the security services here. We also know that include visitors to the United States. Are you concerned about that? Do you think that the Uzbek government is concerned about your influence overall, the U.S. assistance influence?
I think the government of Uzbekistan wants to be independent. And we support their goal of being independent. And so obviously any country is going to have to balance its independence with its desire to have relationships with other countries. Uzbekistan continues to be have very close economic relationship with Russia, whether it's through trade, whether it's through remittances from migrant workers. That equals influence to a certain degree. As Uzbekistan's relationship with the United States and with other countries grows stronger, there will be similar, ways for countries to have an influence here. So I think the responsibility is on Uzbekistan and its leadership to make sure that it has a diversity of relationships, so that it ultimately emerges independent as a result. And we support that goal.
In our analysis, we see that Tashkent is more sensitive about the political effect, political influence of Russia, whereas they're more sensitive about American funding. So when it comes to the United States, they care more about the money, like who's doing
what kind of funding? You mean
financially. Oh yeah, like NGOs, activism.
Well, all I can
any
say
kinds
is,
of-
our funding is very transparent. The government is well aware of our various assistance programs and who our partners with are, who we partner with on these programs. So they have ample opportunity to object to these programs if they think it's something that threatens the